And we're live, everyone. Please feel free to make a start. Sorry, Jess, you might just have to unmute yourself.
Yes, okay, Deb, over to you to kick us off.
Talofa lava and warm greetings, everyone. Welcome to session 1, putting integration into action, a youth-led conversation. Great to have you all here today. My name is Deborah Kunwayu, a volunteer and a youth representative on the Samoa Red Cross Society board. I'll be one of your moderators today. And we've got a lot to cover in a short period of time. And I look forward to your engagement. I'd like to also introduce my co-facilitator, Jess Liz, who will run through a few housekeeping things.
Wonderful, thanks so much, Deb, and welcome everyone. So yes, as Deb said, my name is Jess Lees. I work at Humanitarian Advisory Group, and I'm thrilled to be here supporting Deb in this session. Full disclosure, I can't technically consider myself a youth anymore, but yes, very happy to be supporting Deb's youth leadership. I'd like to shout out quickly to all the panelists, but not only to the panelists, but everybody else who has supported in pulling this session together, especially Cedric Holbrecht from World Vision for his important coordination. So I'm from Australia, and in Australia we open this by recognising the traditional custodians of the land. So for me, it's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So I'd like to extend the same for us all here today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands across the world on which we all live and work, and paying our respect to their elders past, present and emerging. So quick overview of the session today. We're going to spend about 25 minutes in a round of questions and answers, hearing from the 4 wonderful panelists we've got. And then we've got about 10 to 15 minutes for some questions from the audience. So as a panelist is speaking, please be thinking about what questions you might have for them and be noting them down. We'd also like to offer you the opportunity and invite you to share your reflections in the chat function. It's a great way for you to engage with the discussion as well. And when it does come to the audience Q&A time, please place your questions in the Q&A box. We might not be able to get to every single question, but please put them in there and we'll get to as many as we possibly can in the time allowed. So that's to you, Deb, so you can take us through a round of introductions from our 4 fabulous panelists.
Thanks, Jess. So our 4 amazing and inspiring panelists, and inspiring panelists this morning. First, we have Moses Sikivo. He's the regional coordinator of the World Bank funded Pacific Resilience Program based at the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat in Suva, Fiji. Please, Moses, explain your role and why you're excited about the topic.
Good morning, say good afternoon, Deborah, and good afternoon, Jess, and everybody on the panel and everybody tuning in. The World Bank funded Pacific Resilience Program includes a series of projects that cover a number of countries in the Pacific. The World Bank funded Pacific Resilience Program covers a number of countries in the Pacific, such as Samoa and Tonga and the Marshall Islands, supported by 2 regional organizations, the Pacific Community and as well the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, where I work. The focus, there are 3 strategic objectives really. The first one is about strengthening early warning and preparedness of the PrEP beneficiary countries. The second objective is around supporting the resilient investments in infrastructure and the like. And the third objective is about supporting not only the beneficiary countries, but the region as a whole in terms of financial protection against disasters. This topic is kind of dear to my heart, having been involved historically in a lot of the work around the countries at the genesis, really, if I can say, of the movement on integrating approaches to addressing the impacts of climate change and as well disaster risk. So that's why I'm here, and I'm very fortunate to be given this opportunity to participate in this panel. I look forward to the discussions and happy to respond to any questions that might be forthcoming. Thank you.
Thank you, Moses. We're pleased to have you on the panel to share your wealth of knowledge and expertise from a regional perspective. Next, we have Ms. Islin Garbiti. She is the Director General of the Ministry of Climate Change in Vanuatu since February 2020. She was also former Director of the Vanuatu Meteorology and Geohazards Department from 2019 to 2020. Please, Ms. Islin, explain your role and why you are excited about the topic today.
Evelyn, do we have you there? We can't hear. There we go. Can see your video. There we go. Perfect.
Okay. Hi, and yes, I'm very excited to join the panel this morning, as I was here right from the beginning when in Vanuatu we started to implement climate change and disaster risk reduction policy, and looking at the work of being behind the work of the mainstreaming of disaster risk reduction in Vanuatu. And I have been very active in the work of the disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation activities since 2001 up to now. And so I'm very excited to be in this meeting and happy to share the experience that we have in Vanuatu with all of us.
Thank you, Ms. Islin. We're very excited to have you on the panel today to share your insights of the integration of DRR in national policies in Vanuatu. Next, we have Ms. Linda Baike. She's a PhD candidate and a teaching assistant at the University of the South Pacific. She has published widely on issues relating to climate change and disaster risk reduction and resilience in the context of Pacific Islands and a wider small island developing states. So Ms. Linda, please explain your role and why you are excited about the topic.
Thank you, Deborah. So yeah, I've been in the research space for quite some time, and I think there's a lot to learn in terms of integration. We are seeing a lot of research come out looking at integrated approaches and how it's working in different countries, different regions, but also at different sectoral levels. And so I'm excited to be part of this session to try to speak on what we are learning from the different researches that has come out, and yeah, happy to join the other panelists and engage with the rest of the group that's joining the session today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Linda. We're very excited to have you on the panel today. And we look forward to hearing your experiences and expertise from an academic perspective. Then next we have, in the last panelist, we have the youngest member of our panel today, Mr. Epelile Suma. He's a volunteer and youth representative on the Fiji Red Cross Society board. He's also the chairperson for the Red Cross Pacific Youth Network. He's been volunteering with the Fiji Red Cross for almost 14 years now. And through his involvement, it has enabled him to grow and develop as a young leader, not only in Fiji, but also in the Pacific region. So please tell us your role and why you are excited about the topic today.
Thanks, Deborah, and thank you for having me join this panel. I'm excited about DRR and climate change adaptation because in the context of the Red Cross, many of our programs are integrated to better build resilience in our community work, both at a branch level and at the grassroots level. I'm also excited as well because as a young person, I hope to bring a youthful perspective to these discussions and share with all of you as well some of the nuggets of gold that have come out of the discussions had yesterday at our youth forum, and some of the information as well that colleagues of mine from around the Pacific have also shared. So it inspires you, but also encourages you as our senior leadership to create space for young people to engage meaningfully in discussions around integration of DRR and climate change. Binaka.
Thank you, Epeli, for that. We are very glad that we have you on the panel to share youth perspective as a young leader in the Pacific. Now we are going to hear from Maridel in the Philippines to bring an external perspective to the discussion and frame our discussion before diving into the details. Okay, I do apologize. There was no sound from the video. Do I continue or? Okay, so hope that video with the writings that was available at the bottom gave you a little bit of an idea of what to expect from our session today. But now I hand over to Jess to take us through some questions. Thank you, Jess.
Wonderful. Thank you, Deb. Now, in the true spirit of this conversation being a conversation that is led by the youth, we're going to kick off with you, Epeli. So can you please talk to us a little bit about some of the things that might have come out of yesterday and why this topic is so important for the future generations? Oh, Apele, we've not got your, mic's off.
Sorry about that, technology. So the whole week I've been pondering around this question of integration of climate change adaptation and DRR, and wondering how it could be, I suppose, relevant for us as people, and what this means for me. When I thought about climate change and DRR, I thought about how closely linked and woven together these two concepts are in building the resilience of our people. And I reflected on the analogy of coconut husk fibers, funnily enough, or what we call in Fiji, when woven together, what we call in Fiji, mangi-mangi, to form rope. And coconut husk fiber rope was woven together to build the great structures of traditional Pacific homes, bind timber together to build the amazing ocean-going vessels that our people used to conquer the Pacific Ocean. And similarly, the integration of DRR and climate change adaptation are closely linked together to build Pacific resilience. And I think this is something that we cannot separate from each other at all when talking about resilience. The reason why it's important for young people is because we don't only just want to survive in the Pacific, we also want to thrive. And from the perspective of the Pacific Red Cross Youth, for example, integration of climate change adaptation and DRR is important for our people because, important in particular for our youth volunteers, because when a disaster hits the Pacific, Pacific Red Cross volunteers are the hands, feet, and muscle that mobilize to reach thousands of people both before and immediately after a disaster. And so in order to be able to achieve this role effectively as young people, we need to be able to be equipped and better equipped, I should say, with the relevant skills, knowledge, and values needed to enhance resilience. And that means ensuring that we continue to weave together climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction, not only in our programming, but in our activities that we carry out, and in the conversations that we have at high-level discussions such as this, but also more importantly, when engaging with our community and our peers and our young people. Naka.
Thanks so much for those initial reflections, Apele. I think it's really important to have that as the initial framing, particularly considering what the end game of integration is, which, as you said, is around building and increasing resilience, not just integration for integration's sake. So thanks. Mosese, we're going to hand over to you now. So as I'm sure a lot of the people on this session are aware, that Pacific has frequently actually been called a global leader in the integration space. So what can you tell us, Mosese? Can you set the scene for us through the lens of the framework for resilient development in the Pacific, the FRDP? What is it and how did it come to be?
Thank you, Jess. Well, it's common knowledge that I guess the FRDP came into being formally after approval by Pacific leaders in September of 2016. It's a regional policy that provides voluntary guidance to a range of different stakeholder groups, such as national governments, the private sector, civil society, and so on priority actions that they can consider pursuing to help strengthen or build the safety and resilience of all the countries and all the communities in the Pacific Islands. The FRDP was really a regional response, a response to the effort that was first put in place by countries, starting with Tonga. And so it's also unique in the sense, somewhat unique in the sense that it's a regional response to a national policy initiative rather than a regional policy initiative that's trying to set the tone for action at a national and at a subnational level. And so with Tonga's first venture into the space, the integration space, if I can call it that, commencing around October of 2009. By the time we rolled around to 2013, at that time, approximately 13 of the 14 independent Pacific Island countries had made a commitment in some shape or form to integrate the approaches to dealing with climate change and to dealing with disaster risk, founded on some very fundamental, I guess, and basic reasons around trying to minimize disruption, recognizing that in both communities of practice, as it were, we were both trying to deal with reducing vulnerability and risk in its many forms and variations. And so at the regional level, actors like my organization, the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, the Pacific Community, SPREP, the UN family, a number of stakeholders that work at the regional level wanted to put in place this framework that in a way that could complement the initiatives that had been undertaken by countries. And so where some countries had developed dedicated plans to integration, which have now commonly been referred to as JNAPs, or Joint National Action Plans for Climate Change and Disaster. Other countries like Vanuatu, and we have Eslyn on the call, developed institutional arrangements as a way to move into this space of integration. They developed a National Advisory Board for climate change and disaster. Some of our countries, particularly like in the North Pacific, you had the Federated States of Micronesia develop an overarching policy initiative that provided guidance then for their states to develop state-level joint action plans for climate change and disaster. So that's really the genesis of this integration approach, going back, as I said, to 2009. And at the regional level, we wanted to keep pace, and we understood the importance of the momentum that was being generated by the countries, and we wanted to remain relevant to their needs and to provide a space that we could operate in a way that could best complement what the countries were trying to pursue. Thank you. Back to you, Jess.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for that overview, Mosese. And the slide that we've got up here, everybody, you can see a bit of a mapping of the progress of some of those national action plans and such that Mosese was talking about, so you can see just how far various countries in the region have come. So Evan, we'll hand over to you now to give us a little bit more of a flavour as to what this actually looks like at the country level. How does a regional framework like this play out in practice? Talk to us about the experience you've had in Vanuatu. Oh, Ezrin, your mic.
Okay.
There we go.
Sorry. Regional frameworks have to be adopted at the national level by way of realigning regional priorities with a national priority, or vice versa. And regional frameworks have to be owned by all countries of the region. And for this, there has to have national policies that addresses climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. And in the context of a country, when we talk about climate change and adaptations and disaster risk reduction integration, we look at the improvement of the governance at the national level, improving planning and implementation for climate change, strengthening gender and social equity mainstreaming in climate change and disaster risk reduction at all levels, increasing financial support and management, enhancing the role of customs. Being as a Pacific country, we have our custom that has a very important role in our lives. And we also look at improving knowledge management, research capacities, and risk reduction measures, assessing our vulnerability and mitigating vulnerability at all levels, national down to the community level, strengthening disaster preparedness, response, and recoveries. So when we look at all these priorities, they cover all different sectors of the government that has to be considered and has to play this role together to ensure that this framework can be implemented by other national levels. So for a country like Vanuatu, we have to organize the institutions and establish a board that includes all the different sectors that looking at addressing climate change and disaster risk reduction in Vanuatu. And it is very important to have this institutional arrangement so to better monitor and monitor the progress of integration at the country level. However, integration have to be put into action, has to be shown at the community level. And for that, national plans have to be realigned again for countries that are divided into islands that have to be grouped in the form of provinces. So we have in that level as same as Vanuatu, we have the provincial plans that have to capture climate change and disaster risk reduction integration. And then from the provincial plans, then we develop community plans for addressing climate change and disaster risk reduction. So community plans address the heart of what we want when we develop those regional frameworks, because all of us will agree with me that this is the heart of integrating climate change and disaster risk reduction at the community level, putting all the plans, policies into action. So we need to adopt all the national provincial plans into a community plan that will trigger the action of the people that are living in the community. As I said, this is the heart, the main target of this regional framework, to shift behavior and the way of thinking of the Pacific people to integrate climate change and disaster risk reduction in their daily living. So this is where private sector role is very important to assist the government to implement its priorities at the community level, encouraging the communities to react, to adopt climate change activities and make them a lifestyle. So it's very important for us, if we want to see this to become real in our lives, it has to be climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction integration has to be a lifestyle in all levels.
Thanks so much for that, Eslyn. It certainly gives a bit of a flavour as what the implications are for a regional framework like this at the community level, as well as highlighting, I think, some of the complexities that we're facing. Touched on so many important points there, so thank you. Linda, I'm going to hand over to you now to talk us through a little bit of about what's coming out from the academic side of things in terms of integration literature. What are we learning from some of the important pieces of research around integration?
Thanks, Jess. In terms of what we're learning across the different researches that are happening around us, there has been an evolving recognition of the need for integration, and that climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction should be embedded in all aspects of development and planning. While the Pacific Islands are among the first in the world to implement integration, we heard from Mosese that 13 of the out of the 14 Pacific Island countries have an uptake on integration at the national level, although in different shapes and forms. We are also increasingly seeing other regions, for example, the Asia and the Caribbean region implement integration into national policies and plans. And we also heard from Epeli that while thinking through integration, he mentioned that we can already see a clear linkage in terms of the conceptual definitions around CCA and DRR, the conceptual definitions and the overlapping strategies to address risks posed by climate change and natural hazards has actually been seen as a fundamental rationale for integration. But bringing this back home for the PICs, lessons we are seeing coming out from the researchers continues to point to far greater benefits, and we go beyond just looking at the conceptual frameworks behind climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. Lessons emerging from our countries speak to things like bringing together the traditionally siloed communities of practice to address systematic risks that we are seeing across the two different fields. And but also in terms of addressing those risks in a more holistic, coordinated, and harmonized way, and also in a region where capacity limitations, and this is in terms of both technical and financial capacities, that continue to hinder a lot of pathways towards a resilient and sustainable development. Integration has been seen as a means of a mutual learning where the two different communities of practice can come together and share lessons, lessons originating from those two different spaces. But also we have seen that the integration approach also helps with, in terms of capacity, the capacity limitation part, where we see countries can share expertise, not only across the region where a lot of risks are shared, but also across multi-sectoral levels in the countries. And as mentioned by Mosese earlier, it helps in preventing duplication of efforts. And also I wanted to add that it also helps with effective prioritization of the already limited resources we have. Thanks, Jess.
Great, thanks for that, Linda, and certainly seems like there's a very consistent picture around some of the complexities as well as what we can learn from some of those to take us forward. I'm going to go back to Deb now, who's going to take us through a series of questions around some of the challenges of integration. So Deb, back over to you.
Thanks, Jess. Now I'm going to shift momentarily to understand some of the challenges. We don't want to dwell on negatives, but it is important background to help us understand what needs to be overcome to make progress. So with that being said, we'll start off with our youngest panelist, Mr. Pelile Suma. What are some of the challenges that the youth movement faces? And how does a lack of integration of DRR and climate change adaptation make it challenging for youth volunteers to support their communities?
Thank you, Deborah. So I'll cite two challenges quickly, and these were two that sort of came up during the course of our youth forum yesterday, and in discussions that I've had with fellow youth members. The first was around the continued engagement of children and youth in decision making. And I think this is a challenge largely owing to the Pacific context, the cultural context that we're in. But not dwelling on the negatives, I'd like to highlight that a positive that has arisen out of this is the engagement of young people throughout this year's Pacific Resilience meeting. At the PRM Youth Forum in 2019, young people made a point to emphasize the need to engage and include us throughout these high-level policy decisions, discussions and meetings. And so our inclusion throughout PRM 2021 as panelists, as moderators, facilitators, to contribute towards these discussions and the outcomes of the PRM is a positive that has arisen out of this challenge that we continue to face as young people. This, though, needs to be reflected more at a national level and at a community level, though, so that we're able to build generational sustainability for this journey of resilience that we are working towards. The second challenge that I'd like to touch on just briefly is around capacity building for young people in a child and youth-centered manner. If young people are not equipped with the relevant skills, knowledge to interpret and disseminate information on climate change adaptation and DRR in a manner appropriate to their context, then our efforts to build community resilience fall short. In saying this, though, integrating climate change adaptation and DRR to build resilience is a shared responsibility, and one which, as young people, we have taken on and taken the lead with to share knowledge with our peers, whether it is through song and dance, maximizing learning and the reach of that learning through the use of social media, and engaging with our peers at various levels and in various spaces to share knowledge. At yesterday's youth forum, for example, one example cited was the use of TikTok to educate and share knowledge with young people in a manner that is digestible for their peers and relatable as well. The great thing about all of these challenges is that young people themselves have developed the solutions for them and are taking charge to implement a way forward and build resilience in their own way. We are conquering the challenges, I suppose is what I should say. Yeah, Binaka, Deborah.
Thank you, Epeli. Yes, just a touch base on some of the points you already mentioned about shared responsibilities, maximizing learning, use of TikTok, and all these things that millennials nowadays actually tap more into. Also, I guess the best part about this is when you said engagement of young people in youth and in policies and these documents that they publish at a very high level. So thank you, Epeli. And that leads me to my next question. Mosese, what has been difficult for you in the journey with the FRDP?
Thanks, Deb. I guess there's difficulties on different levels here. I guess in terms of the way that we've engaged, and I'll speak to the perspective from a regional actor point of view, in terms of the engagement with the countries. This is a journey that countries have been on for quite some time now, well on 12 years. And so the consistency of effort or staying the course, I think, is a challenge, but also an opportunity. Names and faces are changing all the time. People are moving on to other jobs. And there are, of course, also changing priorities at the government level and at a subnational level as well. And so maintaining the consistency of effort is something that is much harder to come by. But as I mentioned, it's also an opportunity. An opportunity in the sense as well for those of us who work at the regional level to maintain a consistency of engagement, to make sure that the engagement is enduring, and then that can be reliable, that has good levels of integrity, because it is not easy, or it's easier said than done to continue with this journey of integration. We've learned from our neighboring regions how difficult it is just to have the conversation. Well, we fortunately have had the conversation. It's about maintaining the consistency of the effort. And so that really is, I think, in a nutshell, what we all need to collectively try to address. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Moses. Yes, you sharing about consistency of efforts, that actually is a great point to raise. And I think our next panelist would be able to give us a bit of an idea of some of the national policies which they have done in Vanuatu. So Ms. Eslin, at the country level, what have been some of the sticking points or obstacles?
Thank you, Deborah. Yes, challenges are faced at all levels, but for Vanuatu, well, our geographical location is a big challenge for us because it increases our vulnerability to very severe disasters that we faced. However, it is also like while it's a challenge for us, but it's also highlighted the gaps that there that we need to address and improve on, so that we can continue to overcome in times of disasters like this. And for us, as I mentioned, this is demonstrated by our exposure to the number of severe tropical cyclones that we faced lately, but that we cannot avoid. But however, we also realize that knowledge gap is something that we'll continue to address. And sometimes we also realize that with different high level or policy documents that we develop, the understanding at the community level of what is written there and how to implement it is another issue that needs to be brought down to the community level to better understand what it is all about. Yeah, if the communities really understand what is written in the sector plans, in the community plans, then they will adopt and they will know what to do in times of the different disasters. It doesn't mean that we didn't do anything, but we continue to build the capacity at all levels, from the national down to the community level. And for that, I thank the civil society community in Vanuatu that they are helping us in implementing those activities at the community level to ensure that people at the community better understand the issues or better understand the challenges and how to mitigate the challenges that we face in Vanuatu. And knowledge sharing is and knowledge management is something that we really identify that is another challenge. As I said, we are prone to very severe tropical cyclones, but putting that information of warning down to the community level, we really still need to make a lot of improvement to improve the language of the warnings that we issue of all different hazards that we issue to the community, and also improve the language on the response plans to all these hazards that we are facing here. Also, as other colleagues mentioned, in terms of context in the Pacific, we also realize that the strengthening gender and social equity mainstreaming continues to be an issue that we will continue to need to address as we continue to move forward. And every body has to have a space with, but however, like whoever they are, the community, all have to have their space and all have to have have a special consideration to them on the way we do things, we plan, and the way we respond to all these situations that we are facing in the communities, in the provinces, and at the national level. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eslin. I guess implementation of policy to a country level is something that I would take from what you just said earlier, and definitely knowledge sharing. Next, we have Ms. Linda. What are some of the things that has come out of research initiatives in terms of challenges?
I think we have heard a lot from what's happening in Vanuatu in terms of the challenges. So I would just like to add that while there is a lot going on in terms, I mean, at the international and national level, and with what we are seeing with the FRDP, huge challenges still exist in reconciling these frameworks, policies, with practical on the ground implementation. And we've heard a lot about communities. I think at the end of the day, it's important to learn what's working for the communities, what's not working for them, and build on successful lessons. And in this process, it's important to not only look at vulnerable, we often label them as a vulnerable groups, women, children, and people with disabilities. I think it's time we shift that the conversation to look at ways in which they can effectively contribute to building integrated approaches, and resilience to their communities. Thanks.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you to our panel for the great discussions around challenges. Now I'll hand over to Jess to shift gears to focus on the future.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Deb. Now, unfortunately, because of the richness of discussion that we've been having today, we're not going to have time for the round of audience question list. But we do invite everyone to join us this afternoon in the second learning lab, where we're going to continue this discussion. So the learning lab that you're looking at, the way forward, integration in theory and practice across levels in the Pacific. So we invite you to all come to that discussion so we can continue to flesh out some of these important issues that come out of the discussion today. So I'd like to just provide some, hand over to Apelli rather, to provide us with some closing reflections and some positivity. So Apelli, through how can we feel positive about moving forward?
Thanks, Jess. So, listening to all the discussions that have taken place and reflecting in particular on a statement that was made by Reverend Bhagwan in the opening plenary, where he talked about having to nurture at home. I think moving forward, looking into the future, and this is on behalf of the young people of the Pacific, this is my request to our senior leadership. In order to build resilience and support youth to become the creators and the implementers of solutions to address climate change adaptation and DRR, it's also about creating the nurturing and enabling environments for youth. So nurture the young people that you have around you to build sustainable leadership. It's often said that young people are the leaders of tomorrow, but as seen with the rich discussions that were had yesterday and the contributions of youth, young people are the leaders of today. And so I would like to encourage all our young people to continue to take charge of the type of Pacific that you inherit moving forward, and for our leaders to continue to support young people to do their best and be their best in achieving resilience for the Pacific.
Thanks so much. I think that's the perfect way to close the session today, Apele. The youth are the leaders of today, not just of tomorrow. So with that, thank you to everybody for joining us, for your engagement in the chat and for questions. Apologies that we didn't get to them. Thank you to all of our amazing panelists for those deep reflections and rich discussion. And a huge thank you again to everybody who's been involved in the session together. And we look forward to continuing the discussion with you in the Learning Lab session later this afternoon.